Hi, in this video I'm going to show how to improve React performances by operating with useMemo, useCallback, React.Memo, and by isolating properly each component. I will start with a very simple React application where we have a header here with the logo and the login button, and then a component, it is just a counter where we have a button, and when we increase the button we have this score that increases. My code for the moment is in one single component with the header, the main section, and my score counter there. I'm going to open my developer tool to go to my profiler tab and to my component tab to open the settings in order to be sure that the checkbox highlight updates when component render. I made another video to explain how the profiler and the component works. If you want to watch it, anyway, this checkbox allows us to see when a component is re-rendering. If you see, when I click this button, we see the header that has a green border. It means it is re-rendering. Actually, it is not what we want, because we want that when we click this button, only this button and its component re-renders. Here we see that also the header is re-rendering. We can operate in several ways in order to avoid this. What I'm going to do is that I select my score component and I separate it into another component. I place it in a separate component. I created the components folder, and there I create a score component. I use a React extension in order to create a new component, and I copy there my code. For the moment I do not have anything passing to it. I have the increase counter and the score that I need to copy there, so I go to my app, I take this state and I place it into my component. I need to import useState. Here we are, and now I can import my component into my main app. Here it is. We have our app executing. If now I try to increase my counter, you can see that only my score component counter is re-rendering and not my header. If you watch at my header, you can see that there is no green border when I interact with my component. Now, I want to introduce a state also to my header. And obviously, the idea is to separate your header in a single component and introduce the state and the various setter for the state there, but it is not always possible. So let's suppose we need to keep my state here and to separate the component anyway, and you will see how to use other React hooks in order to increase the performance of your application. I create a new component, a header. I paste my code there, and then I can import my header component into my app, and here it is. We still have my app functioning. I want now to introduce some business logic there and to see how to avoid, when I play with the state there, with the state present in my application, to have this child that re-renders. So I create a state for my authentication, useState, out data, set out data, and here let me create a couple of constants. Logged in data with is logged a true, and the username, my name Mario, and then I create also state, let's call it state. I create also a logged out state, where the variable is logged is false and the username is empty. I initialize my state with a logged out state. Okay, let me do things properly. We create also a type for this state, as we are using TypeScript. Export interface outState type with is logged, that is a boolean, and username, that is a string. In this way I can use it. I can declare the type there. There, and even to my React hook. Let me close this one. Perfect. Now we want to pass this state to the header. So I want to pass the out data and also a setter function. It's a function where we pass the state for our application. The authentication state is logged, and we can say here we can set it directly with the ternary condition, set out data. We can say that if the user is passing is logged in, then, and if it is true, then the state we are setting to our application is logged in state, otherwise it's a logged out state. It is complaining because I should declare the type. To our header, we want to pass the current state and the setter, or the login handler. Okay, here we are. Now, in our header, we need to declare these props. Let's make it properly. Interface header props. We said that we want to pass the out data, and the out data will be of type out state type, and also what do we pass? A login handler. That is a function. And now to our component we pass props of this type, header props, and we want to destructure our components. So out. Okay, here we have a spelling problem. Out data, perfect. If we go into our header, now we are receiving these two parameters, out data and login handler. We destructure them from our props. And now we need to use them. On the base of our out data, we want here to see login or logout and to coordinate the authentication with respect to that. So we can conditionally say that if out data is logged in, then we show this with logout, and when we click the logout, we can call the login handler there. We want to log out in this case if we are logged in, so we pass false. Otherwise, we copy it. Otherwise, we want the text to be login, and we pass to the login handler true. Here we are. So let me see. We have passed this login handler. When we have login, if we click, we pass true to this variable. So we use the setter to our state to pass the login state. Here, in fact, we are simulating that we are executing a backend call. For example, here it is. While once we are logged in, if we click here, we will see a logout, we click, we call this login handler with the false variable, and we pass the logout state. In this case, we see that if we click login, we see logout, and vice versa. Okay, now we see how to improve the performance here, because you see that when I click this button, you see that also this component inside is re-rendering, while we are not changing its state, so we don't want it to re-render. And what we can do, if we go back to our app, we go to the score counter, we are exporting it by default. What we can do is just to wrap it into React.Memo. React.Memo is a higher order function that allows us to tell the application to re-render this component only if its props changes. In this case, we do not have the props, or obviously also if the state changes, but in this case is re-render it only if the props changes. The props didn't change, so we don't want this component to re-render. I refresh my application. If I click login, let's see here around the border should not appear. In fact, when you see the border is not there, you can see this border appearing, but this big border is just the main section component that is rendered, and that's okay because inside the child component didn't change. Perfect. We introduced this React.Memo concept. Now, let's suppose we need also to pass to our child the login handler. We pass it. We need to declare it inside. So let's declare it like that for simplicity. Let's save it. And let's see what happens if we execute again login logout. Watch now around the component and the green border is appearing. It means that our children, in this case our score component, is re-rendering, and we don't want it, because in this case, even if we are not using this function, the component is re-rendering. And why it is that? It's because our state changes. And when React executes this code at every render cycle, actually, as this is a function, it is instantiating a new instance of this function. In order to avoid that, we can use another React hook that is called useCallback. And useCallback takes a couple of parameters. The first parameter is the function we want to memoize, and the second parameter is a dependency array. In this dependency array, we can express all these functions for which, or all these, variables for which, if they change, the function will be instantiated again. In this case, I can give an empty array so that only at the first application render the function will be instantiated, then this will reference always to the same function. In this way, the score counter will see always the same function reference and will not repaint. Let's refresh our application. If you watch this component, when I click login and logout, we do not see anymore the green border around the component. It means it is not repainting again. Perfect. So we introduce also the useCallback. I want to talk you about a third hook, useMemo, that you can introduce in order to improve your performance. So let's say here I have an intensive computational function, for example, compute stats. Well, let's simulate that we are executing a long for loop. I declare here variable test 0 and then a for loop. And then let's return a test. Okay, and let's use this compute stats. Here I create another section. Let me create a new section and a paragraph. Let's simulate total stats. And here I call this function. Here it is. So what is happening in my component? Every time the component repaints, re-render, even if it is because my prop changes or if it's because my state changes, this computer stats is re-executed. If I refresh my page, you can see that now we don't experience any change in performance, but let me augment the number of zeros. I add gradually some zeros. Okay, now when we click the button, you see that the score changes, but after a bit of time. I click it again, and that's a problem because every time I click the button, the set score is called, the state changes, the component is re-rendered, and this is recomputed. But we don't want it. We want ideally to memoize, it means to store this value, the computed stats, and to recompute it only if something happens. And we can achieve that by using a new React hook that is the useMemo. That is, as the name says, memoizing the result of a function that we pass as a first argument and is re-executing it when a dependency array changes. It means we have, as for the useCallback, a dependency array where we can pass several items, several variables. When the value of that variable or of those variables changes, then it recomputes the function and gives the result. Here it is no more a function, but it is just a result, and we see that if I refresh my page, it computes it the first time, but then it doesn't compute anymore, and our score can change very quickly because it uses the pre-computed values. So, in order to improve our performances, we saw in this video the importance of isolating each component and where possible to keep the state inside the component and not in the parent state, but when you need to insert it into the parent state and to pass it to various children, it's important to think about if it's necessary for the children to have a React.Memo in order for that child to change only if the prop changes. Then pay attention that the functions are re-instantiated at every render if we don't want, but if we want them to be re-instantiated only if a certain conditions happens, we use the useCallback. The same thing when we have something that is computationally intensive, like compute stats or an operation that I simulated it like that, we can decide to memoize the result with the useMemo hook and to recompute it only when some condition happen. Okay, thank you guys. We arrived to the end of the video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe to the channel.